All the best. 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 Good evening. A very, very warm welcome to everybody who's here this evening to celebrate the memory and legacy of Saleem Kidwai, who we've gathered together, whose life and whose work we are going to celebrate. And this is in no way a condolence meeting. This is actually not even reminding us of a great loss, which it is, but also primarily to remind ourselves of the immense gains of what his life represented and what his work represented, what we have got from it, and we will continue to get from it. So just a sort of brief introduction of why and who got together to present this evening, which is titled Mehfil-e-Saleem, and where we really tried to, through the aesthetics of the program as well as the content of it, we've tried to remember Saleem in the way that we think he would like to be remembered. So this was really after the sudden shock of his passing away, which was very, very sudden indeed. After that shock, sort of settled in a bit, after the news settled in a bit, one really started thinking about, what he meant in so many people's lives, what he represented for so many of us. People who were in the queer movement, people who were outside of it, people who were sort of on the margins of it, people who taught, people who were musicians, people who were historians. So many people were actually affected by his death. And it was very evident in the memorial meetings that one attended right after his death. But we got thinking about it in Jadavpur University, the English department, and some faculty and students got together to talk about, what this meant. And particularly sort of, there is a course that I had started in 2005, which was perhaps the first full-length postgraduate course on queer studies way back then in India. So, that's a course, that has been running for a decade and a half now. And the current batch of students and my colleague, Dr. Kosa Bokshi, who's going to be welcoming you after me, we sat down and we were discussing, what this meant. Because when one thought back, in 2005, when one was young and queer movement was young, well, young, I don't know, younger, definitely. And I mean, now I think, it was a kind of rash thing to do. I mean, what did one know about queer literature? At least what did I know about queer literature that much? One had read something, but what made it happen, I think now, was the publication of the book, Same-Sex Love in India. It enabled us to think that, we could start a course like this. There was material out there. There were things that we wanted to read and teach and wanted others to read and enjoy. And, also the politics of it. I mean, it was just such an exciting time. And that excitement, I think I've always shared with a fellow traveler, which is SAFO, the organization which has defined queer movement in the city for many, many years now, over 2 decades now. So right from the inception of that course, SAFO has been a part of that course. So I always used to invite Malavika and Akankha, then also very young people who had launched this extraordinarily, brave. Now I think, probably we were all very foolhardy, but again, people like Saleem taught us to be foolhardy, just go out there and do it. And you can probably, just do it. You learn the job on the job. So I think, so they have been, frequent visitors to the course, talking to our students, and we've always tried to sort of combine this activism and academic rigor in the course. And SAFO has always been, part of that endeavor. So when one began to think about the legacy of Saleem and what the course had benefited from it, and I think, the course wouldn't have happened if that was there. I mean, now I look back on it, I really think that. So I just approached SAFO and said, Saleem has meant so much in terms of the movement, but he's also meant so much in terms of queer pedagogy, queer classrooms, and these are now everywhere. But we forget what actually made it possible in the first place. So maybe we should look at that history. And Saleem was a historian who was constantly reminding us of the importance of queer histories. So this is also, in some way trying to look back at that moment, look back and somehow revive that excitement and the newness and the originality of that moment, and convey it to our students, whose enterprise really has made today's evening possible. So I genuinely feel that it's not just the decriminalization of 377, which is critically important, but it is the enabling of the imagination that is done by work such as Saleem did. And it is, to help us to imagine that other worlds are possible, that other lives are possible, that other kinds of being are possible. And, it is to pay a tribute to that, but mostly to remind ourselves that we have this wealth of material that has been given to us, that we are here to celebrate Saleem's memory and carry on his legacy. And, I would just like to sort of also realize that this is something that very young people have put together. And it is, it's just so heartening. So if you look at the SAFO leadership now, which is represented by Koel and Fidoshini and Kodika and all these people, it's not Malavika and Akanka anymore. So I think, people like me should take a back seat and say, you should, really hear Kosta, who is, my younger colleague who co-teaches the course with me now. So please, Kosta, would you like to speak a few words?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Paramitadi. A very hearty welcome to all of you once again. And I thank SAFO for Equality for agreeing to be on board with us in organizing this. I am also very, very thankful to my students. I mean, they have put in a lot of effort for this and also the love that came out of it. In fact, this is really important, this particular occasion, because Saleem Kidwai for people like us was always an icon. And for me, as I graduated from the university in the middle of the first decade of the millennium, discovering same-sex love in India on the bookshelves of bookstores in Kolkata was in itself extremely liberating. And if there are a few watershed moments in the history of LGBTQ plus movement in India, I believe this was one moment of queer liberalism, which we acknowledge today. And at that time, the world around us was rapidly changing, and we were moving from an analog to a digital era in a lightning fast speed. And at the LGBTQ plus movement found new directions across social media around that time. And for many of us, life became a lot easier than it used to be earlier. I mean, comparatively easier. But that little freedom that we began to enjoy and what we enjoy today, maybe with the current generation of LGBTQ people, much younger than me as well, I believe that demands an acknowledgement of the fabulous work of the likes of Saleem Kidwai, without whom I would love to say that, our real selves, what we really are, I think that could still have been contained within the closet. I believe it would be difficult for us to open the doors and be ourselves out there. It is about, being yourself in the public domain, which was sort of encouraged by Saleem. So this memorial is, I would say, it's not just a tribute to Saleem, it is a tribute to history, for a very long battle against the state, against people's mindset, which actually enables the little liberty that we have today. And the fact that we can talk about it so openly, I mean, with so many people with us on board today. That is a great achievement. That is where, you see some, positive impact of this movement, which has been going on for years. And today, as a teacher at Jadavpur University, with the privilege of being able to teach queer studies along with Professor Paramita Chakraborty, I remember Saleem every day for facilitating in a significant way the integration of queer studies into the mainstream curriculum. This has been enabled by him in a very, very significant way. I would also like to thank all our speakers, Jayashri, Punni, Shohinidhi, Ruth, all of them. They all agreed to speak about their, memories of Saleem today with us. And again, another word of thank and gratitude to my students and SAFU for Equality. With that, I invite Koel Ghosh, the Managing Trustee of SAFU for Equality, to say a few words. Koel, would you? Yeah, please.
Hello, my name is Koel, and I am the Managing Trustee of SAFU for Equality. My pronouns are she and they. I extend my warm greetings from SAFU for Equality and our friends and teammates from the Department of English, Jadavpur University, and welcome you all to Mehfil-e-Saleem. SAFU for Equality is especially honored to be part of this August gathering because we have always believed in recording, archiving, and nurturing the ever so forgotten memory of queer lives and death. Saleem Kidwai, with his living, his politics, and scholarly work, has left behind a legacy which is beyond compare. It is so difficult to present the importance of this presence and his work in a few sentences. His life and death and our collective desire to remember him is not only about exposing the gaping vacuum that stares right back at us from where he resided in all our hearts, but also gives us a chance to remember a queer elder and celebrate him for what he was, for everything that he was. His friendship with Aga Shahid Ali, his reverence for Begum Akhtar, his confidence about his identity, his zeal to underneath evidence of our existence through the ages, and his adab. We thought of calling this a mehfil because to us, Saleem is very much here. And it is a day when we celebrate not just him, but also his love for Lucknowi culture. Borrowing Akhtari Bai's words, Saleem was our हमनफास and our हमनवा. और दोस्त बन के हमने सोचा कि उनके लिए एक महफिल के बिना अगर हमने उन्हें याद किया तो वो दगा के बराबर होगा. We hope you enjoy today's discussion. Thank you very much. I would now request my dear friend from Jadavpur University, is he here? Yes, we would like to now show a small montage that has been created. So I would request that to be played, please. Shobunno of Jadavpur University, undergraduate English, has made this video and we wanted to show it with you.
I don't talk about it very often, but in 1977, I was in a bar and that bar got busted. And I was arrested for being a found in a bawdy house. I was under trial for the remaining period of my life in Canada. And periodically we'd have court dates, and that was very scary. And that was the worst period of being gay and being harassed and being humiliated and feeling low about yourself. The most important thing was that the West is not an answer, does not have an answer. I would have to fight. Things would have to change for the world to get better, my world to get better. And if I had to do anything to it, I'd rather do it in my own country. I wasn't able to do it there as a foreigner, as an alien. So the decision was made for me.
You've actually written on gay rights. You've written about the whole tradition of homosexuality in India, and you have found enough evidence to show that there is nothing un-Indian about about being gay.
Absolutely. There's evidence from over 2,000 years and published written evidence suggesting that there is a fairly widespread tolerance of it. I'm not saying there's total acceptability, but there is widespread acceptability, much more than any other civilization.
Mm-hmm. But you know, given our survey, I know you're saying that this may not be an accurate barometer, but you know, as a gay man yourself, in your family, did you have problems, you know, coming out or being considered being acceptable?
Listen, everyone has problems because it's such a difficult, it's a subject that's not spoken about even now. Forget 20 or 30 years ago. But I haven't had any problems since then. You know, families love people. They don't love their qualities or the traits or the color of their skin or the way they look. Family is much stronger, much more accepting than what we are made to believe it is.
अगर इंसान तारीख से सीखता नहीं है, अगर तारीख से कोई सबक नहीं सीखेगा तो ज़रूर दोहराएगी, क्योंकि तारीख एक किस्म की सोसाइटी की मेमोरी कह सकते हैं आप. और अगर जैसे इंसान की मेमोरी ना हो तो क्या होगा, उस इंसान का कभी कोई काम सही नहीं कर सकता है. इसलिए अगर जो तारीख़ जो पढ़ते हैं और फिर भी नहीं सीखते हैं तो ज़रूर तारीख़ दोहराती है अपने को. और ख़ास कर जो गलतियां होती हैं, जो प्रॉब्लम्स तारीख़ में हुए हैं, उनसे अगर हम नहीं कुछ सीखते हैं तो बहुत प्रॉब्लम्स और क्रिएट होती हैं. लखनवी का किस्सा है कि दिल्ली में मुझे सिगरेट पीते देखती थी वो, मगर लखनऊ में मैं नहीं पीता था क्योंकि बुज़ुर्ग साथ होते थे. तो एक दफ़ा ईद में उनके घर गया उनसे मिलने, तो आके खड़ी हो गई हमारे सामने. वो खुद बहुत पीती थी सिगरेट, वो भी और मलका पुखराज दोनों बहुत पीती थी सिगरेट. आके खड़ी हो गई और वालिद से छुपा लिया हमको और अपनी सिगरेट हमको पीछे पकड़ा दी. पियो.
You know, the individual and the book are two different things. I don't think it's wise to mix that up. But it can't be helped. It can't help if you ignore the sexuality of the writer. So I think this is a balance that it depends on the reader. Is all my writing gay? I don't think so. But maybe it is. If a gay person writing anything becomes gay, then stuff that has nothing to do with sex, why does it have to be put as a gay writing? But we'll never solve that problem. Yep. I mean, what about, as you said, what about all those heterosexuals who've been writing, homosexuals who've been writing heterosexual stories? But the thing that I want to say about discovering the book and the author is that a unique problem that we faced when the book came out was that a lot of young men saying that they couldn't buy the book because their parents would see it. It was almost treated like porn, that if they see this, they think I'm gay. So, you know, it's a very complex world.
But now it's...
Suddenly, there's less self-reflection amongst gay people. Not that I'm saying that as a generation we were superior, but we were forced to reflect on our situations much more than people today. I think the closet has become much bigger. The net has created its own cyber closet, which is so real in some ways, and people can make it so real that it's less of an incentive for people to come out. We tried to do in the High Court by showing how stupid the law was. I think the Supreme Court, by re-emphasizing that law, has opened up the debate, and lots more people are realizing how ridiculous that law is. So it's, in a way, it's all, I mean, I don't think this is 20 steps backwards, you know, 1 step forward. I think there's a lot of little steps ahead, or at least they're showing that we've reached.
This video sets the tone for our event rather poignantly. Before we move on to introduce our speakers, a few words on why we are here and why this remembrance is important. When someone like Saleem Kidwai leaves us, it is difficult to figure out how to remember him ceremonially. He has been so diversely present in the many phases of the cumulative cultural revolution that changed our perception of not only gender and sexuality, but of our idea of what a life of freedom and dignity should look like, that every remembrance seems to fall short of the sheer breadth of his presence. That is why we decided to focus on some very specific aspects of his legacy, which is his role as a historian and archivist, and his involvement in the movement for making queer lives visible, both socially and legally. His long and diverse academic legacy speaks to a vast range of materials, ranging from Urdu poetry, literature, scriptural texts, and Indian classical music. As an extension of his lifelong endeavor as an archivist, he also made available in translation a number of novels by the Urdu novelist Kurtuldin Haider, in translation for a global audience. His role as a historian seamlessly fused with his activism. He was involved in the first round of petitions filed to decriminalize homosexuality by the NAS Foundation, and continued his involvement with people working on the ground for queer rights. So the idea behind this memorial was to simultaneously address these two aspects of Saleem's life. With this brief introduction, we move on to our first speaker. We are delighted to have with us Ponni Arasu. She's a Tamil queer feminist activist, historian, legal practitioner, and performance artist. She has lived and worked with a range of movements, collectives, and networks in Delhi, Chennai, and Bangalore. She currently lives in Batikaloa in eastern Sri Lanka. She was part of the team of activist lawyers who played a role in the decriminalization of adult consensual same-sex activity in Sri Lanka. As a queer activist and scholar, her work has been focused on the lives of queer women and trans folks. Ponni, if you can take over. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. The queers in Sri Lanka are still criminal. I don't know if I typed the bio that way, wishful thinking, but I was part of the team of lawyers who were engaged in decriminalizing same-sex sexual activity in private among adults in India. So I'm really excited to be here. I used to be the youngest in the room. There are many here who might remember that. I am increasingly no longer the youngest in the room. I'm just getting used to it. It's going to take me another 10 years, already been 10 years. But so today I want to talk about my experience of Saleem and others like Saleem. But Saleem particularly because we have some crucial things in common. I think we're both in different ways historians of what I want to call in this assumedly safe space, historians of homos and whores, right? So there's a few of us who have been engaged with writing the histories of homos and whores. And I'm a proud member of that club. So kind of put on record some suggestions about how we may remember someone like Saleem, not just his words, but also how he lived, how he interacted with others. In my case, especially as an activist, because I'm from a land so far from Lucknow and Saleem and Begum Akhtar, and I look at it as this beautiful thing, but I don't always understand the Urdu words. So I want to start with some of the sad stories. Trigger warnings, not happy, but hopefully together we can hold one another in this space. first is the story of this young gay male person who was at a gay night, dancing club night. Back then in the early 2000s, there used to be just one on Tuesdays in Delhi. So as a young person, we were a bunch of queers. We went there as much as possible. We knew the DJ really well. He played all our songs. And often we would end up taking care of wayward queers who basically were sad, got really drunk, and seemed to have nowhere to go at the end of the night. So they would come home to our homes, and then the next morning, once they feel better, we'd find out what's going on. So one such young gay male person, through the entire process of coming with us in our auto to our house in the middle of the night, just spewed the most misogynist things I've ever heard. He basically made it clear to me that I was an irrelevant being, and no woman was relevant except his mother. And the story has stayed with me because of many reasons, which will hopefully become clear. The other story is about this right-wing Hindu fundamentalist trans male person who happens to be living and working on my land, in the Dravidian lands of Madurai, actually. And it's particularly surprising that this person is Tamil, because our Sangis come in a different shade of saffron, and they're still fewer than in many other parts of the country. So this person to be Tamil and to be a trans person, and I first heard of this person in the context of a feminist workshop in Tamil, the only one there is, which is an intensive 3-month workshop. And this person had gone into that space to talk about trans issues. And I was so excited. And then a little while later, only to find out that this person is rabidly right-wing Sanghi. The third moment is a recent conversation with a gay male Sri Lankan friend, because they had a small spurt of Me Too here. And as we were talking about the things you talk about when Me Too hits, we're all very familiar with this in our context there. Been there, done that, you know, or still there doing that. And we had this really, a moment I really treasured, because I said something like, you know, so-and-so, he would never understand what it's like to be harassed in the workplace in the way that I am as a woman. And he just said, yeah, no, absolutely not. I might know of it, but I will never understand it. And that was not an end in the conversation. That didn't take the conversation in another direction, none of that. It was actually an organic part of our conversation, a very difficult conversation we were having about what to do. And the fourth story is about my friend Mario De Pena, who's a fellow historian of homos and whores, and me, when in the second year of our masters, when we were both at Jawaharlal Nehru University, previous version of Jawaharlal Nehru University, where we were also part of forming the students' queer collective called Anjuman. We were in the archive doing our respective research projects, and his project was on hijras and mine was on sex workers and the laws that govern them. My files were maybe possibly burnt during independence because they were irrelevant, and his files were all in the criminal law section of the archive. And we constantly discussed the what this means, and we continue to discuss it to this day. So I want to put all these stories on the table as you listen to the rest of what I want to share with you today. So I want to talk about a politics that is grounded in questioning different forms of normativity, that was indeed often referring to different sorts of identities, but was barely ever shrunk by it. So we said the words back then. Many of us said lesbian, bisexual, and there were all these hilarious stories where TV people would be like, oh, we don't have a lesbian, we have G, arey yaar, G hai, B hai, T hai, L ka hai, and then somebody had to just go be the L, right? And so we all did that, and we said lesbian, bisexual, gay, hijra, trans, etc. And we didn't get into what normative people may call too confusing, some within the queer community and some not, that would make us illegible to society, to the courts, but even sometimes, most importantly, one another. So although there is a long history of gender non-conforming beings, there is a long history of many who didn't fit into any of the alphabets. Some among us chose not to see that, and others didn't name them, although we were working with different sorts of folks on a daily basis. So having said this, to come back to my experience of Saleem and his generation of queer folks, there was a recognition, often organic, sometimes also stressful and tenuous, of differences, hierarchies, along with solidarities. This notion of the ally, it didn't work for me then, it doesn't work for me now, because it rids the ally of having to find their spot in the spectrum of nonconformist politics and selves. So identity was essential at that time and often stated simplistically. And this was for legibility. But at the same time, many of us were constantly aware of the limitations of that. And we thankfully wrote about these limitations as much as we went in the front of cameras and said, yeah, L, I'm the L, come interview me. And it was also a time when they'd ask you, oh, as a lesbian woman, what is your life like? And then I would say, I wake up in the morning, I brush my teeth, So these, and you think I'm joking, but I'm not. These are all real life stories. So in this context, as we are fighting conservative fascist forces, whether it's beyond or outside our movements, especially in LGBTQIA circles, where we are fighting this even within within all of these communities. We have to remember that identities are significant and we don't have the privileges to let go of them, but we also have to remember that we cannot be choked by them unless it's with consent. So how this connects to Saleem and my experience of Saleem is that I did not invent this wheel as a queer activist. I inherited this legacy from people like Saleem, from how he chose, what work he chose to do, from what friends he kept, from who he edited Same-Sex Love in India with, right? So we were not the first ones to construct these solidarities. I was very aware from the very beginning of my political life as a queer person that this is a history that I already had. All I had to do is go and find my place within that as the next generation of queer activists in the early 2000s onwards. So I want to talk a little about the concept of elders. And this is a gift I got from some of the indigenous folks on Turtle Island, also known as Canada, because they use the term elders in a manner where elders teach the young and the young teach the elders. Time is circular and not linear. So for a South Asian person, these words are creepy, right? Because immediately you think of elder relatives and listening to them and obeying them and so on and so forth. But I got this beautiful gift from these peoples across many oceans from my own land of elders. So it's a concept that is one where we learn from one another. It isn't ageist or hierarchical in any sense. And this too, I learned from the likes of Saleem, because we sat and chatted about all the things that we all cared about. And I felt respected. I felt like my opinions were worth it. And I'm sure I asked lots of questions that may have felt very basic to him, or maybe he had to answer them over and over again, I'm sure, as I'm often doing nowadays, because I'm no longer the youngest person in the room. And I never felt that this burdened him. And on the contrary, I felt like it always energized him. So I think these two main points that I want to share with you today are about how there is a politics that's grounded in a critique of non-normativity. And so the continuum between the homo and the whore is so absolutely beautifully organic. There is a politics that needs identities, but it can never exist without full and conscious awareness of how ridiculous they actually are in fully describing our lives. So same-sex love in India, we often talk about the book as the thing that was used in the courts as part of the case, and absolutely, it made a huge difference. But now thinking about it historically in this moment, and that video was incredible, it totally set the tone. Thank you so much for making that. is that same-sex love in India also epitomized this very politics, which is that on the one hand, we took it to court and say, see, these people were Indians, we are also Indian, this is not a Western import. But also it's ridiculous because Ruth and Saleem had collected stuff from a time way before there was India as we know it today. We also use this book while we are fighting the case for all these identity tags, lesbian, gay, bisexual. But if you look at the things in the book, there's no it's absolutely ridiculous to apply these identity tags in any simplistic way to the people in the book, to how they loved, to how they expressed things, to how they felt. You can't, you just actually cannot describe them with these words. So now we have this lovely blessing of being here to say this awesome book that gave the strength for Indian queers to be seen as Indian in the Delhi High Court, while the whole time we know inside that there was no such thing as India, there was no such thing as any of these categories. And I think it's really useful for me to hold that because I think for me, my activism emerges from finding a balance between doing these two things. And I grew into that as someone who is being both a lawyer and a critical legal thinker, and a whole bunch of us who constantly did the work and constantly critiqued ourselves. And that reflection that Saleem was talking about in the last clip, we try to take forward that legacy and continue to do so. So I just wanted to put on the table that and share a love poem from the book, because why not? Okay, so this is Amir Khusro. I have some favorites. Tonight I heard that he whom I want to see will come. May my head be sacrificed to the road you will take. The gazelles in the desert carry their heads in their hands, hoping that you will come hunting them one day. The attraction of love will not leave you unaffected. If you don't come to my funeral, you will come to my grave. My soul has reached the edge. Come so that I may live. Once I am no more, what use will it be if you come? Delhi, oh, its unadorned beloveds. Wear turbans, but their tresses are loose. They openly kill with their pride, though they drink liquor in secret. The Muslims have become sun worshippers. Because of the simple, sprightly Hindu boys, I am desolate and intoxicated. Because of these pure Hindu boys, tied up in their locks, Khusro is like a dog with a collar. The pert one drinks and then denies it to me. What am I to do? For I dare not smell his breath. I saw him once in a dream, and now for years, every night and day, I remind myself of that dream. Only the wind can now carry my feelings to the beloved's abode. For no caravan bearing solace passes this way anymore. Alas, I'm too weak to inquire about him, enough that I am lying at his door. You know that Khusro is famed for his sweet words. If not for my heart's sake, come for my tongue. Sugar is that which is under your tongue, and these are the words that I say. The language of my beloved is Turkish, and Turkish I do not know. Would it not be wonderful if his tongue were in my mouth? Beloved, if at night I put my lips to yours, pretend to be asleep. Don't ask whose mouth this is. Oh Lord, is this me with my shoulder next to my beloved? Have I been in bed, sleeping by his side? The sun that is his face scorched me from afar. It was a relief when I found the shade of his tresses. Don't tie a band around your waist. Let me wrap my hands around instead. O cruel one with your cap askew, whose beloved are you? With your words of love, whom are you seducing now? Take that for some queer desire and 50,000 other things. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ponni. We are overwhelmed, and I mean, that was beautiful. Everything that you spoke made so much sense. It resonated so much with us. Now, it is my privilege to introduce Ruth Vanita, who will be going next. Ruth Vanita is a professor of English and World Cultures at the University of Montana, where she directs the program in South and Southeast Asian Studies. While living in Delhi, she co-founded Manushi, a journal about women and society, a publication that combined academic research and grassroots activism. Ruth Vanita's major works reimagine queer history, focusing on same-sex desire, marriages, and relationships in the Indian context. Along with Saleem Kidwai, she co-edited Same-Sex Love in India, an amalgamation of writings on same-sex desire spanning 2000 years in Indian history. This seminal anthology dismantled many misconceptions surrounding homosexual love and went on to play a significant role in the reading down of Section 377 of the IPC by the Supreme Court of India in the September of 2018. Today, she will speak about her association with Saleem Kidwai and his unparalleled contribution to the construction of queer history in India and its pedagogical legacy. Ruth, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. I'm afraid I am not talking on what you said because Kostas asked me to focus on the difficulties of being gay in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the era when Saleem was a young and middle-aged man. And Kostas said that young people today may not have an idea of that, and that is what he wanted me to focus on. So that's what this is mainly about. At that time in those years, even those of us who were relatively privileged, and this is, I rarely say this, I don't focus on this aspect, but because Kostas asked me, we suffered, I would say, incalculable damage to our psyches, lives, and careers. And I should say that I've used the word privilege, but on the matter of privilege, Saleem and I discussed how in childhood, we both for different reasons faced extreme financial insecurity and how this affected our relationship to money ever after. Again, in different ways, because both of us reacted differently. I've been going through the thousands of emails that he and I exchanged for over 2 decades, and I came across this passage. Saleem never took a victim stance about the injustice that he suffered. Instead, he chose to put a positive spin on it. For example, as you heard in the video, with regard to his arrest in the Montreal bar, when he was a doctoral student at McGill, he said that this made him realize the answer lies not in the West and change must be brought about in India. He also told me that a positive aspect of his not settling down in Canada, as he had intended to do, was that he did not contract HIV, which almost his entire cohort of friends and acquaintances in the West did. Now, all this is true, but it's truth realized in hindsight. At the time, he was deeply traumatized by the arrest. As he said in another interview, he felt intense shame at the thought of anyone finding out about it. I wouldn't be surprised if the severe writing block that he developed later was partly an outcome of this arrest. Before the arrest, his academic performance at McGill was stellar. He told me that his supervisor said no one had performed as brilliantly as Saleem did in the pre-thesis exams. But after the arrest, he did not complete the PhD. He could have completed it in India, but he did not. He was disillusioned with academia in many ways. So there was serious homophobia of this kind, but there was also casual homophobia that may seem casual, but that had long-lasting effects. For example, in 1998, when Saleem was standing in line at the US Embassy to get a visa to come and work with me on the book in Montana, an American visa officer walked up and asked him why he was going to the US. He described all this in an email to me in detail. He showed the officer the book proposal, and the officer was very interested, and he asked many questions, and he approved the visa there and then. It happened that a colleague of ours, a lecturer in English at the DU College, Delhi University College, and a standard liberal leftist, who shall remain nameless, happened to be standing behind Saleem in line. After the officer left, this colleague commented about the officer, he must be a bloody homo. Saleem replied, watch your language, you are speaking to a bloody homo. At that time, in the 90s, Saleem was not out at Delhi University. This is how he came out to this particular colleague, who was then, of course, profusely apologetic. When Saleem emailed me about this the next day, I expressed surprise that this colleague, whom I knew, would use such language. And Saleem wrote back, "Why are you surprised?" He wrote that throughout his years at St. Stephen's as a student, and later as a teacher as well at Ramjas, he heard such language routinely flung about. Now, if you try to imagine what it means to be battered by this, and I said incalculable damage, it cannot be measured what damage this does when you are battered by such language all the time. There was also a sort of amusing side to this. A somewhat amusing side of this was that his closest friends at Ramjas were women colleagues. Therefore, men colleagues, some of them thought that he was a womanizer, those to whom he was not out. And that idea persisted. One older male colleague took him aside and advised him that as long as you are young, these butterflies, I'm translating from Hindi, these butterflies will flutter around you, but in old age you will be alone, so it's better you get married. And well into the 21st century, long after the writing of Same-Sex Love in India and after he was out in the media and everything, he told me that distant relatives and acquaintances of his would propose women for him to marry. So basically, I could tell unfold whose lightest word would, so I can tell many horror stories, but I'm not going to. But I'll just say one aspect, one thing. When I first started working on the book with Saleem in 1995, I had just emerged from 13 years volunteering almost full-time in the women's movement and just teaching to make a living. I felt completely isolated in the movement because women who I suspected might be lesbian or bisexual never mentioned it. And that's because it was basically unspeakable. Therefore, from 1987 onwards, I found gay male friends like Saleem, and I sort of lived two parallel lives in the women's movement and outside it. And it was really on two sides of the railway track in Lajpat Nagar and Jampura. Later, I discovered that many of the feminist leaders in Delhi, both married and single, who must also remain nameless, were having short and long-term relationships with women, often with other feminists in the movement. But till date, and even after some of them got divorced and went on to become international feminist stars, they did not come out. So that gives you an idea of how deep the shame was that all of us internalized, and with good reason. I'm going to read a passage from Saleem's introduction to the medieval Perso-Urdu materials in Same-Sex Love in India. Here he thoughtfully contests the argument that numerous historians of the ancient world still continue to uphold. Most historians claim that all pre-modern relationships between men, whether in Greece, Rome, India, or elsewhere, were between men and boys, a man and a boy. And this has sort of become received wisdom. And Saleem contested this idea. This idea overlooks the fact that the definition of a boy was entirely different from our definition today. A 13 or 14-year-old was not a child, was not considered a child. Babur and Alexander, just to name two, led armies at that age of 13. And of course, most people were working or married or both at that age. Gandhi and his wife were both 13 when they got married. And that was typical, not exceptional. So I'm going to just read a little. Other evidence reveals further that not all beloveds were so young as to be smooth-faced or have down appearing on their faces. Some were soldiers in the army, as is the case in Siraj's Masnavi Bustan-e-Khayal. In this poem, the young soldiers pursue the narrator, who is an older man. In Mir's narrative poem Shola-e-Ishq, the narrator is in love with a married man. In his autobiography, Mir describes the attraction between his father and a young man who is about to get married. Mir also alludes to erotic relationships between boys. The moon-faced one met another moon-face. This is a complicated tale, for it has wheels within wheels. The poet here assumes the persona of a lover irrespective of the age of the beloved. Those who argue that all same-sex relationships at this time were age differentiated assume that these relationships were transient and ceased when the boy grew up, the so-called boy grew up. But there is evidence that some attachments were permanent. An example is the long relationship between the poet Maulvi Mukarram Bakhsh and Mukarram. Mukarram observed iddat, the period of sexual abstinence and mourning prescribed for a widow, when the Maulvi died. Mukarram also inherited the Maulvi's property. Quotes from a poet called Mazhar, who suggests that reciprocity is possible. If someone were to care for my heart as if it were his, when a friend becomes a lover, how wonderful it is. The sexual roles assumed by lover and beloved within the literature are very rarely stated explicitly. Nevertheless, modern commentators presume that if the beloved is a male, he's automatically passive in sexual relations because he's the replacement for a woman in a heterosexual relationship. Then he quotes some critics who take that view. This ignores the fact that sexual contact need not necessarily mean anal intercourse. The issue of sexual activity and passivity does not appear frequently in the ghazal. In most cultures, it's considered shameful for men to play a passive role, and therefore it's unlikely to be openly admitted. That these categories were not fixed. So he's arguing that these categories of so-called active and passive were not fixed. And that is illustrated by the often repeated apocryphal story about Mahmud of Ghazna's distress when he was told that on the day of judgment, sodomizers would have to carry on their shoulders across a very narrow bridge all those whom they had sodomized, otherwise they would fall into hell. He was reassured when he was reminded that he himself would also be on someone else's shoulders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you speaking on these topics. Now we have a performance by an ex-student, Nondita D. I'm just going to introduce her. And you are going to watch her singing as a tribute to Saleem Kidwai. So Dr. Nondita Roy is an assistant professor of communication at the Indian Institute of Management, Lucknow. She also holds the chair position of corporate communications and media relations at IIM Lucknow. Previously, she has taught at IIM Kashipur and the National University of Juridical Sciences, NUJS, Kolkata. Her doctoral thesis is on narrativity and storytelling in video games. Her research interests include game-based learning, new media, and the intersection of technology and gender. She has recorded a performance and we will be presenting it now.
Hello, Anumitra. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Just a minor correction. I have now come to Calcutta. I have left Lucknow and I teach at IIM Calcutta now. I have sung Begum Akhtar's version of Faiz Ahmed Faiz's Aaye Kuch Abr Kuch Sharab Aaye. And I thought this would be apt because this was written by Faiz when he was in the Hyderabad Central Jail, when he was accused of being a participant in the Rawalpindi conspiracy. And though this is something written in a time of great despair, this is at the end of the day a poem that talks about grace, hope, and in some ways celebration and finding joy in the little things, good weather, a glass of wine, and hoping to see your beloved. So that's all I would say. Thank you so much.
कुछ शराब आए कुछ अब कुछ शराब आए इसके बाद आए जो अज़ाब आए इसके बाद आए जो अज़ाब आए बामे मीना से महताब उतरे बामे मीना से महताब उतरे दस्ते साकी में आफ़ताब आए दस्ते साकी में आफ़ताब आए कुछ अब हर रगे खून में फिर चरा रहे हुए फिर चरागाहों, सामने फिर वो बेनकाब आए कुछ अब कर रहा था हमें जहां का हिसाब, कर रहा था हमें जहां का हिसाब। आज तुम यार बेहिसाब आए, आज तुम यार बेहिसाब आए कुछ अब इस तरह अपनी खामोशी गूंजी गूंजी गूंजी, इस तरह अपनी खामोशी गूंजी, गोया हर सिमत से जवाब आए कुछ अब्र कुछ शराब इसके बाद आए जो इसके बाद आए जो अज़ाब आए।
Thank you so much, Nondita Di. That was lovely. We know how hard you worked in this performance. I mean, it was a very short notice, and we really thank you for your presence here. Now, I would like to introduce our third speaker, Professor Sohini Ghosh. Professor Sohini Ghosh is a close friend and associate of Saleem Kidwai's. She engaged actively in what she describes as the vibrant hub of queer socializing that Kidwai facilitated in his life in South Delhi. Sohini Ghosh is the officiating director of AJK Mass Communication Research Center at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. She co-founded Media Storm Collective, India's first all-women documentary production collective, which received the Chameli Devi Jain Award for outstanding work among women media professionals in 1992. Her first independent documentary, Tales of the Night Fairies, won the Best Film Award at Jivika 2003, the National Livelihood Documentary Competition. Ghosh is also the author of Fire, a queer film classic published by Arsenal Pulp Press, Vancouver in 2010 and reprinted by Orient Publishing Delhi in 2011. Today, she will be speaking on Saleem Kidwai's academic legacy with an emphasis on his translations of texts from Urdu, if I'm not wrong about the topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. My only introduction today is that I'm a friend of Saleem's. And I want to start by thanking you for organizing this. And I want to thank you on behalf of Saleem, because I know that wherever he is, he's thrilled that this get-together is happening, and in another city, so many people have got together to think about him, to talk about his work. I can tell you he will be very happy. He is very happy about this. I wasn't told exactly that I would have to speak only about that, so I hope that you will excuse me if I wander about a little bit. But just to say that, one of the things that struck me after he passed is how many people talked about what a good friend he was to everyone. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation today about age and elder and all that. And honestly, I really do think that Saleem and I are still very young, and it's really, how you think that matters. Otherwise it doesn't matter. And I think Saleem really showed that, because he had friends, across all kinds of ages and generations, and young people would meet him, and elder people would meet him, and I don't think he judged anybody by by their age, unless he was picking them up and he would get into trouble or something like that. But I think that what he really did look forward to is some kind of an intellectual or an intelligent or fun or entertaining kind of exchange. And I think that is actually at the heart of friendship. And I say this also as a person who has friends across many generations, and I think that is one essence of friendship, is that it is not really, hemmed in by age of all things. Now, in one of my very favorite books, The Politics of Friendship, written by this French philosopher, Jacques Derrida, he says that one of the laws of friendship is that one friend will die and the other friend will live to mourn that passing. And that even if both friends die together, then their friendship would have been structured by the knowledge that one could go before the other. And that when one does go before the other, then it is the job of the friend who survives to mourn the passing of the other, to do the work of mourning. And I think that today, I'm so happy that on this day, which is like a kind of a 1 month, since he passed, that I don't have to be alone and think about him, and that I have all of you here to talk about him, to share his, memories. And more importantly, I think for all of us is to hear it, because, when I hear other people talk and I hear about, what kind of an influence he has been, or what kind of an impact he has made, I learn something about my friend. And I learned something about, how much he has contributed. And friendship was indeed a very important part of his life, as it has been for me. Both of us have always kind of prioritized friendship over our sexual relationships. We always said lovers will come and go, but friends will remain forever. And I think that now that there is so much of energy spent on fighting about gay marriages, etc., I will really miss Saleem, because I think I just might be a very lonely person in the views that I hold about gay matrimony. And this also kind of brought us close to talking about many things. For instance, in Bombay cinema, we both kind of felt that if any form of cultural form celebrated the idea of friendship, it was actually Bombay cinema, where the codes of friendship and the codes of romantic relationships always overlapped. And I've written about it and we've talked about it. And one of Saleem's very favorite films was Dosti, about these two boys. One who, has, walks with a crutch, and the other, who can't see. And both of them find each other. And the entire narrative of that film is kind of mimics the heterosexual love story of meeting, excitement, friendship, kind of separation, and then eventual reconciliation with a kind of a, elderly woman, like the status of a mother or a mother-in-law, telling both of them ki tumhari jori salamat rahe. And Saleem loved that line, that it ended with. And both of us kind of read it as an allegory of queer love, and that these people, who were not kind of quote unquote normal in their bodies and had this deep, intense relationship with each other, that this film was indeed a kind of an allegory, of friendship or of love. I have to say also that being queer is not just about finding somebody to fall in love with, or somebody to have a kind of a relationship with. I think that friendship for queer people is also very important. And in the clip that you showed, where he talks about how terrible it was when he was in Montreal and the gay bar was raided, and he realized that he was living in this deeply homophobic society, despite having these gay-friendly bars, etc. One of the things that he did during that time, and this is during this period, Sunil Gupta was the guy who kind of navigated him, the photographer Sunil Gupta, around all these spaces. And he said that one of the etiquettes that he learned was how to be with men who were not your lovers. And he said that I had hardly met in India people who were, I only met queer men if I were in a relationship with them, but not people who I didn't know, and that there was something about that. And I see that really as a very early investment in the idea of friendship, in the work of friendship. Just as, Derrida talks about the work of mourning, I think that, it's important for us to talk about the work of friendship, because friendship is, we know a lot of work as well, but very much well worth it. So, and of course you find that idea, and also the idea of friendship and love as not being binaries, but as kind of moving into each other, in conversation with each other, coming together, then coming apart. And you find a lot of that in the same-sex love in India. In many of Ruth's writings, one of my, the Sappho and Virgin Mary, for instance, many instances of that kind. So I think that that was, a very important part of his, mental makeup. And that is why I think he was able to accommodate so many people around him, and that his own house or wherever he was became this place where everybody converged. It always reminds me of this beautiful film that Shyam Benegal made called Mandi, where, no matter where you throw away Rukmini Bai, the Kothe Wali, wherever she goes, आप वीराना में भी उनको छोड़ दीजिए, उनके आसपास कुछ ना कुछ वो एक साथ बैठ जाता है. So Saleem was like that, this, and I think that is also what drew him to Begum Akhtar. That, it's interesting because when I wrote about Saleem after he passed, and I said that, this relationship that he and Shahid developed with Begum Akhtar, because Begum Akhtar was also leading many lives. And later on, I found an article that Saleem wrote in 1997 in the India magazine, where he wrote about, Begum Akhtar, and he actually talks about many lives. He uses that term here, and I hadn't read this for a while. And it's true that, Begum Akhtar also, lived, she was Begum Akhtar, very respectable when she, married Abbasi Saab. And, Saleem and Shahid also kind of, leading one life during the day and one life at night, or actually even during the day, being many people. And I think that this is not an experience that is, uncommon to any one of us. It depends on what your experience is. My experience of leading many lives has been actually not very traumatic, but really quite exciting. And, so it can be, I guess, both ways. So Begum Akhtar has been a very kind of a profound impact on him, also because of how brave she was. She would kind of smoke in public and do all kinds of things. And then, he's told you about one Shararati thing that she did, which you have shown in one of your clips. And and Shahid also. Now, I have always kind of had an argument with him that, and I have written about it also, so I don't want to repeat it, that I always would tell him that you don't write enough. You don't write about subjects in which you really have a deep insight, and you don't finish projects. And I was particularly annoyed with him, and remain annoyed till date, that he did not actually write up the, the biography of Begum Akhtar. And, but he was so incredibly generous that whoever came to him, he would say, take all my material and, do what you want, make a film, make a book. And he helped everybody. So if you see any book or film by Begum Akhtar, you will find that Saleem is part of it. But every time he contributed such a project, he felt that, maybe the relevance of my book doesn't exist anymore. So, और क्या करना, किसी ने तो लिख लिया है, and the more he was doing these projects, the more he was kind of beginning to think like that. And in 1997, when he had written this and he was writing some other stuff, we had decided that we'll make a film on Begum Akhtar. I said that, Saleem, पता नहीं तुम्हारी किताब कब खत्म होगा, चलो film बनाते हैं. और उसमें क्या हुआ कि I still have the letters in my file. I sent it to, India Foundation for the Arts and all that. And I have a whole bunch of stuff like that, where films that never got funded. And I think somebody should one day make a film on the films that never actually got made. And I have two such in my life, in which I put in a lot of effort and research. One was on Uday Shankar, and the other is on, this Begum Akhtar, of which Saleem was a part. And in that, and when we wrote that, when I wrote that, proposal of which he was very much a part, and he was going to be the consultant for the project, a number of people who knew Begum Akhtar, personally, were alive. Whether it was Shanti Kiranand or Sheera, or the person who played the tabla. But the interesting thing was that when we would have conversations, that because there are all kinds of things that Begum Akhtar confided in him and Shahid and all that, which were not part of the public domain. Now, this I think is a very important queer question for all of us, that there is a lot of information we have about people we know, many of them very well-known public figures, and yet they would not reveal that to the public. And you are caught because you don't know, you don't want to betray their trust. And at the same time, you don't want this history to be completely erased. And this has remained a kind of a problem, that how do you do this? One of the most productive and interesting conversations that Saleem and I had more recently has been about the book on Agha Shahid Ali, that you may have seen it. There's a new book out, which is like a biography of Agha Shahid. And there are all kinds of things that are debatable, let me put it this way, and I then once again, of course, I went back to my favorite, whipping boy, Saleem. I said, it's all because of you, because you don't write, you don't honestly speak about, Shahid, and all this is happening, and you have a responsibility to do all that. And once again, we went back to this whole question about how does one tell the story of queer lives? Now, one of the interesting things that we had built into the treatment of the Begum Akhtar that never became or never happened was this subtextual idea, was that we would not try to smooth out any of the contradictions of her life, because different people had different stories. Some would say, oh, she came from this noble family, unko to bilkul ye kotha nahi pasand tha. Koi kahega ki bhai bilkul aisa nahi tha, aakhir tak unko pasand tha, Lucknow se nikal ke wo koi aur hi zindagi jeete the. So we said that, we would have a structure in the film, and we will allow these contradictions to remain. So that, we subtextually, we are making the point that, truth claims, particularly whether you're writing or whether you're making a film, are impossible to make, that there is an impossibility around this question, and that we will allow that to be part of the language of the film. Of course, that film never got made. But then, because of Agha Shahid Ali's book, we went back to that question. So my, thing with Saleem was, find a form that can tell those stories ethically, like if somebody doesn't want you to tell those stories, did not want you to part with that, then it is perhaps our job as historians, as, writers, to try to tell these stories in an ethical way. But how do we, without betraying anybody or their trust, or outing anybody forcibly, or saying that, oh, I know this for sure, because we don't know for sure, how do we actually tell these stories? So I think the problematic of the biographical project is something that we used to talk about quite a lot. And I think that perhaps, one of the reasons that he was so reluctant to write about some of these very intimate things had to do with that dilemma, which is something I deeply respect, because it's much better than, rushing in where angels fear to tread, but to be actually self-reflective. Even though, of course, I never said that I respected that. I told him that he was wrong in not doing this, and not wrong in confronting this. I kept telling him that you don't do this and don't do that. But while we were having these fights, he was actually finishing he did two really outstanding projects. And I think that is what, you said that I should speak about. That very often when we talk about Saleem Kidwai, the book that comes up, of course, most frequently is Same-Sex Love, as it should. But if you look at the two books that he translated of Quratil and Heather, which is Chandni Begum and Safina-e-Gam-e-Dil, which is Ship of Sorrows, I think it is quite incredible. And it is incredible for the simple reason that Quratil and Heather is one of the most difficult people to translate. Any scholar of Quratil and Heather, and I'm not one, but I know enough to know that she is a very difficult person to translate, totally convinced that only she could do justice to the translation of her work, didn't think anybody else could actually do it. And, you know, we know that she did a remarkable job of Aag Ka Darya, the River of Fire. And of course, Saleem was, you know, translating after she passed. And I started reading Chandni Begum because Saleem had, you know, translated it. And, you know, down the, you know, the first 10 pages, 15 pages, I'm like, oh, you know, but it's not like Aag Ka Darya. And then I got into the book and it became this absolutely riveting read. And riveting read in a way that you really have to congratulate the translator for that. Because the language in which the idiom that she was using, if he had done a kind of a direct archaic translation of that, it would not have worked in the way it did. And he managed to do this translation over 2 years, you know, in a way that it reads seamlessly. It has all its plot twists, it has all its witticisms, and all the, you know, the grand illusions that she worked with. You know, one of the things that drove Saleem crazy, or anybody I think who tries to translate Purathil and Heather, is that her allusions are vast. And they're not just South Asian. You know, she'll talk about all kinds of places, all kinds of things. So he finishes this incredible book, you know, Chandni Begum, which, you know, would have remained unknown to somebody like me. I can't read Urdu. I would never have read it in my life. And then, you know, he kind of intrepidly starts translating Safina-e Gam-e-Dil, which is, you know, Ship of Sorrows. Does an excellent translation of it, very good. And then writes this really masterful introduction to the book, which is such a wonderful introduction to the task of translation, to Purathil and Heather, and just the difficulties of, you know, the challenges that a translator faces. And in particular, the kind of, you know, problems that he faced and which he would always talk about, because sometimes he would be so fed up that he would say, "Ye to mere se nahi hoga, ye to I'm giving it up." And it's entirely to the credit of Ritu Menon that, you know, she managed to kind of say, you know, go ahead, do this. And the kind of problems that he faced with the translation was incredible, because there was the original inaccuracy, which the copyist who's copying it has not bothered to correct. Then there is either very lazy proofreading or no proofreading at all. So all the mistakes get then translated. Then there are these inverted commas that open up and then they don't close. So you don't know, is it a quote? What is it happening? There are many voices. You don't know who is speaking. Is it an interior voice? Is it some other character? So it was an incredible task. And then there would be all these global allusions, you know, to, you know, words that he has never come across. So he would have to sit with all the dictionaries. He would look at all these things, incredibly rich and dense and difficult to do. There was one Turkish, so there was, the funny thing is that there was one European name. Clearly the copyist didn't have any idea how to kind of translate that. So in different places, he spelled it differently in Urdu. Ek to lagi jayega, theek ho hi jayegi. So he did that. Then there was another Turkish word. He got in touch with somebody he knew 40 years back in, you know, college to help him with that kind of translation. So an incredible amount of work to put in and to, you know, do this wonderful translation of Chandni Begum, and also that introduction, which I think is like a must read for all scholars who are interested in, you know, translation of works. But I'll end with this, you know, these two books, and also come back to this question of friendship. The last 6 years, ever since, you know, the Modi government came to power, has been a dreadfully dark period for Saleem, as for all of us. As for all of us who believe in a certain kind of India, imagine this guy went to Montreal, went to study, faced with all this, and decides to come back to a place which he thinks is his own. And then all of a sudden, many of us are suddenly told that, you know, this place that you thought was your home is not yours. This place that you thought you belonged to is a place you cannot belong to. And it was incredibly sad for Saleem to see what was unfolding around him all the time. And though he has given other examples of other reasons as to why he translated Chandni Begum, he said, it's the last book my mother read before she died. and then he said that, why he chose the Ship of Sorrows. He said because, this is the novel with which he was trying to perfect the kind of narrative strategies that she would actually use eventually in the River of Fire, Aap Ka Darya. But I have a kind of a feeling that perhaps subconsciously he chose those two books because they are actually in some ways about revisiting the time that we are living through. Because Chandni Begum is also around the time of the Mandir Masjid controversy, the Rath Yatra, it is kind of allegorically referred to in the book that there is a masjid controversy going on. It is not really referring to what had happened at that time, but anybody who has lived through that period or knows about that period will immediately recognize that. And the kind of problems that these, suddenly these people in Safina Mein Dil, in Ship of Sorrows, which again is around the time of partition. So suddenly they are struck, these characters, and that's just one, let me read out just one paragraph of what Saleem writes. And he says, and he's talking about Ship of Sorrows, Safina Mein Dil. He says, all of Haidar's characters are troubled by the uncertain future that awaits them. They are all conscious of the passing of time, the clock constantly ticking towards denouement and upheaval. Sometimes it passes beautifully, at other times it seems ominously frozen. It may gush like a waterfall or flow like eternity. On other occasions, it hurtles furiously towards disaster. Time could be phoenix, time which is alive, but time can also annihilate. And I think that these books really spoke to the inner predicament that he was facing. And I say this because I know that there must be a lot of us who have faced this predicament. I don't know, especially if you're living in North India, it is also a kind of visceral presence. And don't forget that Saleem was living right in the heart of UP, which was one of the worst hit. And it was unbelievable what was unfolding, that you couldn't believe that this country that was your home, something that, you loved, had suddenly become, different. It's almost like a phantasmagoria that you're standing in the middle of what seems like familiar surroundings and something around you was always changing. And this moment is also, as you know, a deeply polarizing moment about, traitors and friends, who's a traitor, who's a friend. And suddenly you find that, your friends are no longer your friends, or, you are suddenly being called a traitor. So all these things were very, very difficult. And these were conversations that we would often have. And normally I'm always the more optimistic one, saying that, things will change. And I do believe they will. And, once when we had a particularly distressing conversation, and I said, oh my God, what have we done? We've ended up, kind of depressing each other. So I wrote to him saying that, but history shows that this will change. And he wrote back saying, yes, it will, but will I be alive to see that? And that is something that, I will be always haunted by, that if there is a change, if we can ever go back, and which I think we will, that, if we can reclaim what was ours, which we must, and it is our job to do that, I will really miss not having Saleem by my side. But I think that he has, as you have, all talked about and you put together, that he has given us a lot to talk about. Many things are tangible, like the books that we are talking about, same-sex love in India. But the other, which is, I think, our responsibility to preserve, that how do you actually talk about queer lives? How do you do queer archiving about intangibilities like friendship, of love, of affection, of camaraderie, of a feeling of community? And we all have to figure out how to preserve histories of that kind, histories that are not necessarily those that don't have a material existence. And I'm sure that we will all collectively be able to figure out a way of doing that. So with that, I will end. Thank you very much for inviting me to this really wonderful gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rohini. This is such a beautiful transition to our next speaker, because I think the ethics and difficulties of archiving intimate stories and personal lives of queer people is something that is very important, but also very contested. So we move to our next speaker, T. Jayashi. T. Jayashi has written, produced, and directed for international television, radio, feature films, and independent documentaries over 2.5 decades. Her award-winning work focuses on the intersection between gender, sexuality, law, and public health. Her films are widely screened around the globe. Most importantly, she has played a foundational role in documenting the everyday lives of queer people as part of the effort to render such lives visible. To this effect, she has founded Kamra, which is a gender and sexual minorities archive in India. It is a physical multimedia archive located in Bangalore. It started with a collection of video footage from the year 2000. Now it has accumulated over 1,000 hours of video footage, still photographs, newspapers, clippings in 5 languages, books, diaries, and manuscripts. The purpose of this archive was to construct a living archive and not just a recreation of nostalgia. The material in Kamra is about the public history of the movement, but the focus is on the private lives of individuals, of which there is very little existing documentation. So with this, we move on to our last speaker, Jayashi, if you would like to take the stage. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Parobita Chakrabarti and the Jadavpur English Department and the SAFO team for inviting me today to be part of this Mehfil. And thank you, Shoini, because she set up all those questions that I wanted to bring it up, especially with my conversation with Saleem over the last 3 years, but exactly and precisely on these issues that Shoini actually flagged. So I want to start with showing you this image, which you're seeing in the screen now. It's called DARE, Documentation, Active Research, Archive Research and Education. And this is something Saleem and his friends started in the mid-90s, but it didn't go anywhere because Saleem said this was way ahead of its time. So he was already thinking about archiving, documenting, etc. And when I met him in 2018, he spoke a little bit about this. And but actually earlier this year, I found this in one of the collections that we have. And I took a picture and I sent it to Saleem and I said, look what I found. And he just responded with one word, memories, with an exclamation mark. So I was hoping to find more information and story about how this came about and why it fizzled, but I didn't get a chance to have that conversation with him. And I'm trying to now find out who are the other 3 members who started this DARE with him. So if any of you have any clue, please do write to me and let me know. So now I want to talk about my interaction with Saleem. I mean, of course, I had read his book and I'd known about him, but I actually met him in 2013 when he came to Bangalore to be part of this workshop on queer archiving. And this idea of queer archiving actually came about when 2012, the Kaushal hearings were going on in Supreme Court. So this question that was asked, who are the homosexuals? Do they exist? So there was this big problem because how do you keep record? And what does record keeping mean? And especially in the context of IPC 377. So my own work has been, since then, since 2011 almost, was to document this whole process. Who are the people who are part of this litigation, especially when Voices Against 377 came together? I wanted to go and talk to them and figure out what really prompted people to put their names to this petition and what really happened and what was the arc of this thing, and it was still going on. So I wanted to see how it unfolds. So when Saleem came, and there were a lot of other people as well in this workshop, they talked about what archiving means. But Saleem really took pains to teach us and tell us the difference between documenting, archiving, and also about what are you going to do with the material. That was his main concern. And he also wanted to differentiate archiving from libraries. So he had the experience of as a historian accessing archives and also a deep interest in how archives would be set up. And especially something which is coming from below from the community, and how do we then, what would be the principles in which you would work? How would you do this work? So for me, as a documentary filmmaker who has been only looking at it from an outside, following some of my friends and activists and protests, just listening to him, I started having this question about what happens to my footage that I have collected. Where is it going to go? And where will we keep it? And in the process of filming itself, when people realized that I was not filming to edit and put out a film, but I'm actually doing this as a long-term project, a lot of them started talking about very intimate details about their lives. And they also said, don't use it now, keep it. Now, that's a dilemma for me. I will keep it, but something happens to me, then what happens to this? So this was a question I also started thinking about. And after that workshop, he was very, very disturbed, because he also felt that we are now entering an era of visual world. That's what he talked about. We are going to be in this visual world where material is created on the go. And there's so much more material that we are going to forget about our past. We're going to forget about what is already there, which is non-digital. Who is going to preserve it? Who is going to keep this? So he kind of emphasized this whole idea that we must have a physical archive, and we should have very clear-cut rules and regulations about how we are going to keep it, who's going to collect it, and all of these things. And this was in 2013, and so I did this interview, and I told him, listen, you have come all the way to Bangalore. I don't think I'm going to come to Lucknow. So can we just have a chat? So he said, fine. And then we had an hour of conversation, part of which I'll show you towards the end of my conversation with all of you. So then we just stopped, and then we said, okay, fine, we'll see what we can do. And see, archiving, whether it's digital or non-digital, it involves a lot of hard work, a lot of very monotonous work, which I think after a point the group kind of fizzled out and nobody really followed. Then a couple of years later, I started thinking, like, what am I going to do with all these tapes and hard disks, and where is it going to go? And that's when we said, okay, actually Ponni Arasu is also here. She came literally to my studio and she said, you have 2 rooms, please start cataloging and then we'll see where it goes. So I just started cataloging the material that I have, which is my own material. And when the word came out that I'm starting to catalog, I started getting this huge amount of young people who came and said, we will help you catalog. Can we help? So I had the students, who would come in the afternoon and then sprawl on the floor and start, doing data entry. And that's when I called Saleem. A bunch of us started talking about how do we start cataloging. And we all said, we have to talk to Saleem. And I called him and I said, will you come to Bangalore? He said, no, I can't come. I have a lot of health issues. And the previous time when he was in Bangalore, he had some problem and then he had to be hospitalized. So he was very anxious. He said, I will not come, but you call me and you come and visit me. So I started calling him. I said, how do we do? What do you mean by cataloging? How do we catalog? What do we do with this material? Then he said, for queer people, for queer history, the most important thing is the date. We need to put a date and time to everything that we have. And then he said, provenance is important. Where is it coming from? So I said, okay, we have these 3 collections. We'll start looking at where it's coming from and what are the dates. So we started working on it. Then in 2018, I went and visited him. And he said, the only thing he said, you come, but you're not going to film me. You're not going to record me. So I didn't even take a photograph with him. I just went to his house and I spent 12 hours talking nonstop. And we've all talked about, and we've seen some of his beautiful house with, book-lined walls. So, and we kept moving from one place to the other, in this living room, talking about different things. And he said, you have to do this. I'm going to list out what he told me in a bit. And we kept talking about how do we go about archiving queer lives. And then he also was like very, very, Ashwini said, very disturbed by the growing Islamophobia and living in Lucknow. But at the same time, he told me the history, gave me a glimpse of the city of Lucknow and its queerness. And he said, you must come back and you have to follow these stories. And I have some 3 or 4 storylines that I have with me, which, somebody should follow it up. And these are people who lived queer lives in the city of Lucknow. No one knows them because they are very, very ordinary people. So for him, the most important thing was an archive should also have talk about the history or the story or the life of ordinary people, ordinary lives that have been lived, and not just only prominent people, you know. So that was his main emphasis about this. So he really made Lucknow very interesting for me, and actually quite glamorous for me, because my previous experience with Lucknow has always been going to slums of Lucknow and, you know, actually filming really, really sad situations. So here was this man who was, you know, showing me all of this. And of course, I also discovered that he had this, we shared a common interest in the Nordic noir. We both loved those thrillers. So he gave me some, say, okay, read it on your way back home, you know. And so it was really, the whole conversation had so many layers and so many things, depths, and I have not a single image, but the images in my head. So those memories are completely etched in my head. So now coming to actually what is it that he wanted us to do and how he mentored us was, so the thing about ordinary lives, those are important. And how do we go about finding those ordinary lives? You have to talk to people, you have to spend time, and you have to get all those little bit of gossip and nitbits and then go following them, right? And that's how you put stories together. You talk to families. That was his thing. He said, you know, maybe estranged from your family, you would have not seen again, met again at all, yet you will find one family member who will tell you the untold story. So he had all these, you know, little investigative journalism type, thriller type way of looking and following these stories. And then, of course, when I came home, I just, you know, wrote down all of these points. So apart from that, he said, we need this, I'm quoting him, he said, we need a mechanism to safely store physical material. So for him, the safety was a very, very important issue. He said, we can, taking from what Shohini was also echoing, we need to record these stories, but we don't want to betray anybody. We don't want to tell anything now, but 50 years from now, people will ask us. They will say, what happened? Why did these people not tell us or keep this information for us? So for that, in that sense, he was always looking about the future. He was not interested in the present. He was interested very much in the past, which will inform us about our future. So that was his thing. So in fact, even the name Kamra, the words that we are using, reflection, not just memory, reflection is also coming from these conversations that we had with Saleem. The other thing that he talked about, of course, was date. And he said, even if some of the material we got, which had a certain order from the collection, but he said, forget the order here, date is very, very important. So these are some of the things that we changed, because there is a certain standards of archival standards that exist, which a lot of the archives follow, institutional archives especially. But having learned from that, we've also realized, how does it work for us and for this material? And this is something now we are writing about, and we'll be sharing it very soon, to say how queer materials dictate a certain kind of standards that we need to keep. And maybe this is the way to go about. We are not very sure, but this is a beginning in that direction. And then he was very, very concerned about consent and privacy. He said, you have to do everything with consent of the person, and you have to preserve the privacy of the person. And this is something very, very important for us. And it is, again, there is no black and white, it's full of gray shade. So how do we articulate a language for ourselves when we deal with such things? Which is also the reason why even all of you would have heard about Kamra for the last 4 years. It is not yet public, because we still are figuring out these things. So this is where Saleem was talking to us regularly, would tell us what we should do, which way we are going, whether we are in the right path or not. And then he, of course, wrote the first, the introductory newsletter. He wrote a small piece about why and it is important to archive queer lives. And his own work, he has a lot of photographs that he used to take of his friends in intimate spaces. And I think some of the people here would also been part of those shoots. He was trying to actually preserve those negatives and scan them. And I think Sunil Gupta, his friend, is actually helping him do that. And I don't know what state it is in right now, but he had sent all the negatives to Sunil to scan. Then he was also because of the digital age, he was also very worried about non-digital material. How do we keep? He had collected huge amount of magazines and newsletters from the 70s and 80s, and he's collected them. And the other thing to look at was vernacular media. He said, in local languages, you will find fiction, non-fiction, reportage, which talks about queer lives. And those are the places to go to actually, if you are seeking material, those are the places to go and follow up. Then in my last conversation, which happened a couple of months ago, when he was very happy that he got his shots, and he was very happy I had gotten my shots, because he said, now maybe you can come again. And one of the things he was, because we were writing the policy document for the archive, he said he had this question, and we are still grappling with it, and he was also grappling with it. He said, is the scenario, right? You have two people, A and B, and they are lovers, and they've been writing to each other. And A writes the letter to B. So A is the writer, B is the recipient of those letters. Now the question is, who owns the letters? Is it as a writer you own it, or as a recipient you own it? Now the A is dead and gone. B is donating these letters. And now suppose both of them are not around and they have donated this letter. Who owns it now? Are archives the owners of material? Are they custodians of the material? Now, this is something there is a lot of question about, because are archives really the owners of everything that they have? And the next question that comes is that suppose the family or somebody else from the A or the B person say that this is invading our privacy, because it defames us. These are our family members who live this debauched life. Now you want to make it public. Why, we don't want it. Then what happens? Then when A is writing to B, they're also mentioning other people. So what happens to those other people's privacy? They're still alive. There is a very simple solution for that. You redact names. That's what a lot of people do. But there's a larger question, because it's about queer lives. How do we then present such material? Do we then burn them and not make it part of our collections? Or we keep it in our collection, but we, figure out a way to come around this. And this is case by case. So it has to be one after the other. So these are some of the questions that we are dealing with. And Saleem was like a big, thinking head for us. But now not having him, we still have to deal with it. And we have to even more be careful of all of those concerns that he had raised since 2013. And I hope we will do justice to this work. And now before ending, I want to show this 4-minute video that I have taken out from that hour-long conversation I had with him. It's not, I have not edited too much because I wanted to show it in the raw form. There's also a lot of construction noise and everything. So please bear with that, with me for that. But it's really nice to see him. And I am going to really miss his quiet way of smiling and warmth, and, and my WhatsApp conversation that I had with him in the last 2-3 years. So thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you the video now.
The main chapter is about Kesar.
And in which he says that Kesar was very good, very fond of non-vegetarian food, and she used to be very good at cooking something called standing chicken. What is a standing chicken? It was a position. And I figured out it must have been Kara Masala.
Kara Masala.
I mean, this is why the need to write history was so important. I was teaching history without having to teach. I needed to teach my own history. So I was coming across my own history all the time when I was researching on other subjects, but this was something that I couldn't really put out there because in our time there was complete silence. Ruth and I were two people who found each other by gaydar practically and became friends because we were the two only identifiable gay people in the university at the time. Now, in my own college, they're having gay seminars and stuff, but the change was so rapid that it's difficult to what it was like before this. That's why some people, for instance, even now, people coming out of 2009 don't understand the judgment or don't know too much about it or what went into getting that judgment. But sitting in the court and hearing Sham Devana argue for voices, honestly, my hair stood at its end. Like, I sat there in the Delhi High Court and I said, this is enough. Sham Devan was speaking in the first person and saying, my bedroom. I don't sort of get up in the morning and leave the house and stop being gay. It's something that's a part of me and that has to be acknowledged and it doesn't have to do with only with sex. Now, for me, just hearing those things being said in the High Court, I didn't think I would.
Jashi, I think the volume has gone away.
No, I think it's an internet issue, isn't it?
Jeshi, could you kindly unmute yourself? You're on mute. Maybe that's why we can't. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine.
Should I'll start playing again?
Yes, please, because I think we missed it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
This is the main chapter is about cases.
Can you hear now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
And in which he says that Kesar Pai was very good, very fond of non-vegetarian food, and she was very good at cooking something called standing chicken. And really, what is a standing chicken? I mean,
Still very low, isn't it?
And I just figured out it must have been khara masala.
Khada masala.
Jayashree, I think there's a problem. We cannot see the video. So I would request Shab. Yeah. Can we request someone from our end to play it? Like Shabarno could share the screen. Shabarno? Thank you.
But this is the main chapter is about Kesar Pai.
And in which he says that Kesar Pai was very good, very fond of non-vegetarian food, and she used to be very good at cooking something called standing chicken. And it really bothered me. I mean, what is a standing chicken? I mean, what you cook it in a certain position or whatever. Then I just figured out it must have been khada masala.
Khada masala.
I mean, this is why the need to write history was so important. I was teaching history without having to being able to teach my own history. So I was coming across my own history all the time when I was researching on other subjects, but this was something that I couldn't really put out there because in our time there was complete silence. I mean, Ruth and I were the two people who found each other by gaydar practically and became friends because we were the two only identifiable gay people in the university at the time. Of course, now in my own college they're having gay seminars and stuff, but the change was so rapid that it's difficult to imagine what it was like before this. That's why some people, for instance, even now, people coming out after 2009 really don't understand the judgment or don't know too much about it or what went into getting that judgment. But sitting in the court and hearing Sham Devana argue for voices, honestly, my hair stood at its end at times. I sat there in the Delhi High Court and I said, this is enough for me, because Sham Dewan was speaking as in the first person and saying, my life doesn't end in my bedroom. I don't sort of get up in the morning and leave the house and stop being gay. It's something that's a part of me, and that has to be acknowledged, and it doesn't have to do with only with sex. Now, for me, just hearing those things being said in the High Court, I didn't think I would be seeing that day. So maybe for me as a historian, I think time spans are longer, and I think of change as taking over much longer. And this here suddenly came so suddenly. Of course, I was thrilled, and I was surprised. Honestly, I was surprised. I would say, I think the principle that I held personally, it would still be relevant to fight phobia, and that is only a part. I mean, being gay is only a part of your whole personality. Of course, it is your personality, but if there's work that I'm doing as a gay, if my work as a gay historian is going to get respect, it means a lot of hard work. It means being good at what you're subject, being honest with the labor you put in. And if you do that, I mean, I think it's building up your own self-confidence, which helps you fight, whether it's family or whether it's work discrimination or any other discrimination. You've got to be good at honest with what you're doing. And I find in this new world, because of job opportunities and careers taking a sort of becoming so open, a lot of people are just wasting their time hopping around, jumping around, not concentrating enough. And that, I think, comes from the fact that people are not reading enough. I think a lot of them are not aware of the history. Yeah, that would be my basic thing to young people, is do not forget history. Because it's like our memory, our collective memory. And if, like a man without a memory is a vegetable, so is a community without a memory. And what we can learn, what we've already learned, we don't need to relearn again. What generations earlier, we don't have to reinvent the wheel at every stage. Every generation shouldn't have to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jayashree ma'am. I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we were all really interested in the act of archiving queer lives. And I mean, this is very enlightening and very interesting for all of us. Paromita, do you would like to introduce a few close associates of Saleem Kidwai to speak now?
Thank you, all speakers. It's just a really very emotional moment, because we really had, we had a sort of plan for the program, but it couldn't have panned out, more beautifully in terms of structure, in terms of, how everybody was resonating with everybody else, taking up points raised by, former speakers. So this was more like a conversation than we'd ever expected it to be. So thank you so much. And also, what a wonderful point to end on. Shohini raised that question of queer histories, and it was, just so close to his heart. And this is his legacy. So, young people have their work cut out for them. So thank you, Jayashree, very much for actually, giving us a task to do. So it's not just, we can't just sit back and, just enjoy what Saleem's done, but we've got to carry his work forward. So thank you, Shohini and Jayashree, particularly for, having sort of outlined what really the legacy for young people would be, to do this task, to complete this task, or carry on this task. We can't really complete it. So I'd really I've come in to ask some friends who I see in the list, people who were close to Saleem and would be wonderful if some of them spoke about their experiences or their friendships. Shohini's raised that very, very important point of friendships and the immense generosity and hospitality of Saleem, which I, completely sort of by chance have had once enjoyed when the IWS conference was on in Lucknow, and he had characteristically just had a sort of dawat. So, Madhvi is here. So Madhvi, would you please like to talk to us a little bit about that Awadhi culture, which was, and the many ways in which Saleem symbolized the city, as indeed you do as well. So Madhvi, would you like to come on?
I didn't expect to do this, so I'm not really, my hair is not even combed, but anyway, I guess Saleem will forgive me for that. But I think it's been a beautiful program, and I really, what a good way to celebrate him, remember him. It's been difficult also, but I want to just thank all the speakers who've been just fantastic, and for you guys for organizing it. He lived his life, and what do I say about Lucknow? But he chose to come back, and I was part more intensely of the last 20 years of his life. And me along, and he chose to come back to be with his family, to be in the city he loved. And it's so interesting that the city that he loved, and I think he was the typical Lucknow man, or the special Lucknow man, or the Lucknow person. But I don't know if Lucknow realizes that. But he was, and he felt most comfortable here, and he took the most pride in, as everyone knows, in feeding people with his sister Sufi, who was his partner in chef and whatever, and the whole thing about Lucknow hospitality, having people in his home, showing them around. But I think that what I do want to I'm sorry, just a second. Some children around who don't know I'm on a call. But I think that one more thing I just want to say is that there was so much that was incomplete that he wanted to do. And from books he wanted to translate, as I put in the messages, to a museum that he wanted to have of all the singers before Begum Akhtar. He actually would have loved to, buy the home that she lived in. And we managed to do the mazar, but there was so much else incomplete. And I think that it was a phase in his life where he was wanting to be quiet. But like Shohini said, he actually lived his life with friendships. And the gang we had in the last few years was a friend from every decade. And it started from the 20s, 30s, and he was the Buddha Baba at the end, who felt the youngest. And also he'd made a list of people that he wanted in Lucknow for us, because I work for Sanat Kada, that he was a core team member and advisor. And he'd made a long list of people who I was supposed to record and archive, Jayashree. People whose lives we were supposed to record and archive. Some of the stories that he might have told you about the Lucknow people, I know about one or two of them. And he never put himself on that list. He had no business to do that. But I just thought he's going to be always around. And actually, I lived with him for the last 17, 18 years. And I never recorded him. Can you guys imagine? You have such superb material. Because he was making a list of like everyone who was above 90 and 85, and he didn't come anywhere there. He had decided to slow down and come here and, take it all in. But that's the way it was. So it was very incomplete. And somewhere, we still have to mark him in the history of Lucknow as who he was fully. I mean, someone from the Kidwai family, someone who was gay, like he said, someone who was a historian. And that marking, you all have to help me do in Lucknow. So I think that that's still a bit of an incomplete story. But he was really, really behind us. And I'm finding it very difficult to go ahead with the rest of our work. But taking from all of you, yeah, his friendships were so strong. And you guys were all there from Jadavpur. You really missed someone you could come and have those long conversations with. But Sufi's still there, and Jamal's there, his nephew, and I'm there at Sanat Kada. So you can always come, and maybe we'll give a really phika, like whatever thing of it. But please, आप always आइएगा सलीम की तरफ से, आपको निमंत्रण है.
Paramita, you're muted.
Paramita, mute.
So just wanted to thank Madhvi and thank her for this very generous invitation, which is totally in the spirit of Lucknow and the spirit of Saleem. And I think it's a very good note to end on because it's sort of hopeful. I mean, there's work to be done, and there are young people around. I mean, what could be better?
Sorry, Paramita. Yeah. I just want to show everyone the photo behind me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can everyone see
it? Yeah.
Wow. So there he is in his best pose, advising us, and I'm sitting in my office, and he's there behind us. Sorry.
No. This is what we want to see. So I think, Amrita, we are going to take some questions, yes? Or Madhu, you're there. Madhu, would you just share something with us?
No, I have no question. I'm loving this evening, loving hearing everyone. So nothing that I want to say.
Oh, come on, please, Madhu.
No, seriously, not at this point. But I think the idea of meeting up in Lucknow
is very good.
Is terrific. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else who would like to share some memories? Jaya just said she didn't want to, but anybody else there? Or if anybody had any questions at all. So Amrita, are we going to open for questions or comments?
Yes, we can open it for questions, and we also have an impromptu plan of playing a ghazal because after Madhviji's intervention, I think it's going to be incomplete without it. So yeah.
Okay, so any questions from the audience?
Okay, some people want to know where the talk is going to be posted. So Sappho must respond.
It's already streaming on YouTube. So I'll just drop in the streaming link here and also the link to our channel so that everybody can access it later as well.
It's also up on Facebook in case you want to see it. It's in Sappho for Equality's page, also shared there. And please feel free. Please share the link to the show so that everybody can
access it. Right away.
So if there's no pressing questions as such, and if there aren't anybody else, there isn't anybody else who would like to share, I think we should start wrapping up.
Hello, I can say a word.
Amrita, over to you.
Priya, should we play the song?
Yeah, let us play the song.
I think someone said they wanted to speak. I don't know. I just heard a blip.
Yes.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. This is Sujata, and I thought I may as well put in a word or two. I am the sister of Siddharth Gautam, who was a gay activist amongst many other things, and he and Saleem had a long, intense friendship. Maybe not that long because my brother passed away almost 30 years ago now. He was then 27. But Saleem was quite devastated when he passed away, and apparently wept all night long. He since then he has been a big figure in our lives. Now, I didn't see him that often, but Saleem was always there, and he was there as an older brother, as a friend, who spent a lot of time consoling me about my brother's death, or talking about the impact that he had on gay activism, and that I should actually archive his papers, etc. So later on, my son visited Lucknow and stayed on there for 3 years, and he struck up a friendship with Saleem. And so it was Saleem always kept the tradition alive over generations. So he treated my son in a certain special manner, because he was my brother's nephew. And my daughter too, when she visited, he did the same. He gave her a beautiful shawl, gave her a copy of his book. I spent a week there with him and Sufi Appa during a Sanat Kada festival. And of course, I was treated marvelously. He gave me a fantastic outfit, of a chicken outfit. Super expensive, I'm sure, but it was beautiful. So he had the special touch. And one of the things that I really regret is, it's like a dagger in my heart, is that every time I spoke to him, it was always a snippet here, a snippet there over breakfast. And I would say, Saleem, I have to listen to the story of you and Siddharth. And those days when you're all hanging out on his chat or your place, and having these gala evenings of gay gatherings, and he would say, "Ha, Anna, kisi din baithenge fursat se." And so it's only thanks to my son that I came to Lucknow three years in a row and saw him several times. But that baitna and baat karna never did take place, and I will regret it for all my life. That it's now that world that would have come from him to me directly has been lost. But for all of us, the whole family, my husband, all my children, he will always be a figure of gravitas, a figure of warmth and friendship, a figure we were all a little bit intimidated by, but whom we love dearly. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Sujata. That was lovely.
Thank you so much, Sujata.
Yeah.
So should we move on to if there's no speakers or questions, then we should move on to the vote of thanks, and we invite Cole from SAPO to do the honors. Cole, are you there?
Yeah, hello. What a beautiful evening. Actually, evenings are this beautiful, this meaningful, this personal. I think we should have many such more evenings talking about queer elders, talking about people who matter, talking about lives that needs to be celebrated, that needs to be talked about. I would like to thank our speakers, Ruth Vanita, Shohini Ghosh, Poni Arasu, and T. Jayashree. Thank you so much for the time, the effort. I would like to thank Madhuri Kukreja for the last minute. That was so personal. It didn't seem like it was a meeting. It seemed like we were having a conversation. Thank you, Sujata Winfield, for sharing such experience with us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my friends and teammates from the Department of English, Jadavpur University, Amrita Dash. Can we have a big round of applause for all the students? They've done such a fantastic job. Anumitra Paul, Shabunna Sinha, who's made the montage, Melanie Dhar, Ohana Chando, Anunna Ray, Astaryata Dash, I'm sorry if I've mistaken your name, Trijit Acharya, Ruttosha Roy, and Nandita Roy, of course, and her mother, Malavika Roy, for their beautiful presentation. We wish to extend our warmest regards to Dr. Paramita Chakraborty and Dr. Kaustubh Bokshi for their guidance, their patience, and for extending their hand to originate this bond of friendship between SAFA for Equality and the Department of English, Jadavpur University. For whatever it means, we really hope to remember, celebrate, and cherish more and more queer lives as we move forward in our attempts to challenge this heteronormativity and this heteropatriarchal society. With that, I would like to say goodbye and thank you so much for being with us. Bye-bye.
So we will play a short clip, right?
Yes, please.
चलते 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 यूं ही कोई मिल गया था यूं ही कोई मिल गया था
Okay. Are we just signing out now?
Thank you so much, everyone. This was really beautiful and moving. Thank you.
Thank you. Really glad to have all of you here. Really enjoyed. Pony, we really enjoyed you speaking. It was amazing. And
thank you for
thank
the
you to all of you.
opportunity, folks. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Jayashree.
Thank you.
Pony, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah. Okay, so just be in touch. We are thinking of actually, and this I just wanted to say, finally, we are thinking of actually instituting a kind of monthly lecture. It could be, on, some of the themes that were touched on today, so that people have time, more time to showcase, their experiences, memories with Saleem, etc. So it doesn't have to be Saleem, but generally on queer lives and queer histories. So we are in the process of planning that. So we'll be in touch with you guys. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.